So it's great to see that the Citizens Breakfast has grown to be what it is. So it's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation very much. My name is Ralph Maima. But just by way of quick introduction, I live up on Oak Street, a few blocks from here. I've lived in Brattleboro for about 8.5 years. My job is running the MBA program at Marlborough College Graduate School down at the Grad Center. And we've been in existence for 4 years now, operating as an MBA program. And the program has managing for sustainability as its purpose. And so I was, you know, I've been in the sort of sustainability business for a long time, in that ever since I was in college, or even before college, I've been very interested in environmental issues and human rights issues, and really just kind of generally disturbed to the core of my being by abuse and injustice and the inefficient use of the things that we all rely on for a decent life. And along the way, I've been sort of, you could say schizophrenic, or you could say hypocritical, or better or worse things. But basically, I've been one of these people who sort of had one foot in the conventional world of business and proper conformist person, and then one foot very drawn to things that are maybe radical, but are attempting to make things better for everybody, and also to restore some of the in many cases massive misalignments that we see between what we are doing and what we could be doing. And so, you know, at earlier stages in my existence, you know, I was, for example, working for a satellite company in Reston, Virginia, and working on a master's degree in international relations and an MBA too. And at the same time drawn to green politics. This is back in the mid-'80s. But in 1987, there was a gathering that happened at Hampshire College. It was in June or July of 1987, called the Green Gathering, and there were something like 1,000 people there, including a lot of authors and civil rights activists who were trying to form an American green movement, a green party. And people who were not really part of that current, or who didn't read much about it, probably could be forgiven for thinking that it was all about environmentalism, that it was an environmental, you know, the greenies, that they were out for some sort of environmental activism where the Sierra Club and the National Wildlife Federation and Greenpeace were becoming political. But those who were more in the know, who were deeper in, realized that it was a sort of earth and people-centered political consciousness that was not ripe for its time in the United States. It was taking a lot of its inspiration from the Green parties in Europe at the time. And there was a book written by Fritjof Capra and Charlene Spretnak, published in '85 or '86, called Green Politics. And those who were looking a bit more closely at that whole thing realized that, you know, this was sort of where I guess a post-'60s consciousness about Earth and our bodies and food and the land and community and so forth were flowing together. We're encountering older traditions of labor rights and human rights and political liberalism, political progressivism, and so forth. It was a fascinating thing to take part in back then, because it was very holistic, and there were all kinds of different issues interwoven, and you could go from one session to the next and learn about everything from solar power to rooftop gardening to, I guess, not nascent, but a much earlier stage of gender diversity consciousness. And it was all there in the same pot, roiling around. I was here working at SIT about 5 years ago, and the opportunity arose to jump into my current position. And that's what I do now. I've been the director of the MBA program at Marlborough College for 5 years, almost exactly. the reason I give you all of this background is that it's to kind of give you a sense of a canvas of who I am and where I was one evening in September. It was the evening of September 29th, as a matter of fact. And I was sitting in my kitchen up on Oak Street. And I was, trying to get some work done and read my email and do that kind of thing. But I think it was a Friday night. In fact, it wasn't the 29th, it was the 30th of September. And like many of you, I'd been generally aware of what was going on with the Occupy Wall Street movement. I knew that something was going on. It was just out there on the edge of everything for me. But it was not something I was focused on at all. And I didn't know anybody who was involved. Well, I saw a news item, I think, in just some news feed that came into my email, and I clicked on it because I was curious. And I saw something called the Occupation Declaration, or more formally, the Declaration of the Occupation of New York City. And I was curious, and I went to the document and opened it up, and I saw a list of demands, in fact, not demands, I should make that very clear, a list of grievances. And the grievances were extremely holistic. It was not just about corporate greed and crime, for example. And it wasn't just about indebtedness. It wasn't just about foreclosures or any other specific issue. It was a list of, I think, 22 or 23 grievances, which were holistic in total. There were references to agriculture. There were references to environmental catastrophes. There were references to corporate personhood. And it was really a basket of economic and social and political and ecological issues that were being put together in one picture. And I just had this sort of aha moment, and I thought, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was. This was not a narrower sort of single or few issue protest. It's another manifestation of a holistic, progressive or radical consciousness. And I got very curious, and I also thought to myself, wait a minute, these are all exactly the things that our students in the MBA program are concerned about and work on in their different courses. We have courses that look at corporate forms. Who owns, who controls, which kinds of corporations for which missions. The whole corporate personhood debate falls right into that course's conversations. And we have other courses, economics courses and systems thinking courses and so forth. So, I just got very curious. And I immediately took the Occupation Declaration and put it into a Google document, into a table. I ended up calling it the American People's New Economic Charter. But I'm sitting there in my kitchen there, the evening of Friday, September 30th. And I create this Google Doc, and I create a table, and it's basically got two columns, and the left-hand column is, I only took the economically related grievances, which is most of them. I mean, they all have some sort of economic connection. There were a couple I deliberately left out to try to narrow it down a little. Put them in the left column. And in the right column, well, the right column I left blank. And I basically said policies and actions to address these grievances. And I put a few things in myself. I mean, I sort of scattershot a few different sentences, like put a moratorium on foreclosures until after the next election, And then I published this Google Doc. I made it public so that anybody in the world with access to the internet could go in and edit it, completely unprotected. Then what I did was I went to the live streams, and it turned out that very quickly a whole array of live streams had emerged. And there's, for example, there's livestream.org or com, I think. I mean, for me, I've got them all as open tabs in my browser, so I don't even know what the URLs anymore. But there's OccupyStream.org and OccupyStreams.org, and there are quite a few of these out there. Now, I think that OccupyStreams.org actually has an index page with icons and text that you can click on to live streaming of dozens and dozens and dozens of occupations. And this was all emerging very quickly. So I went to the live streams where, when you look at your screen, you'll see a video feed, whatever happens to be going on and wherever the camera's pointed. Sometimes it's not live, They just put videos in or commercials, but a lot of the time these are live. And when the occupations had not been busted up yet, and were still actively on site in all the cities where they were at their peak, typically there was a kind of news desk or anchor, and a continually rotating kaleidoscope of different people coming and sitting down and talking about what they were doing. Meetings, general assemblies, interviews, and so on and so forth. Where people were posting comments, and the chat windows were just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And what was fascinating was that some of these live streams had 15 or 20,000 viewers, and that would just be one live stream. And in minutes, you could click through a variety of these live streams, and you would see evidence of 50 to 100,000 viewers all over the world, virtually taking part, or at least virtually observing what was going on at the physical occupations all over the place. So I'm sitting there in my kitchen, and I decide to start putting in very short little plugs, sort of Twitter-like one-sentence plugs for the American People's New Economic Charter, dropping these little announcements about the existence of this open editing Google Doc into the live streams. And it was fascinating to see because there was an instant response. It was kind of like seeing the internet again with new eyes and feeling the energy of what's possible through these social networks in a way I'd never felt before. And then the number of users who were in the Google Doc viewing it began to climb. 10, 20, 30, 100. And then it started to max out. Google only allows up to 200 simultaneous viewers and up to 10 or 20 simultaneous editors in a Google Doc, and then it shuts you out. But it very quickly got up to its maximum. But here's the interesting thing. What a Google document is, it can be a text document, like a sort of Word document. It can be like a PowerPoint presentation. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be one of a number of other sort of typical online document forms. But the key thing is this. What you can do with Google Docs is you can collaborate, and you can have multiple people, as long as they have access to the internet, you can have multiple people working on a document at the same time. And you can see who's in the document. Well, they can be anonymous or they can be identified depending on how you set it up. But you can see the cursors of these other people jumping around. And you might be writing a sentence, and there might be a cursor half a page above you also writing a sentence. So, it can be extremely interactive and sort of live, because other people jump in and they start writing about securities regulations, and they start writing about student debt and changes in legislation. And then people start cutting and pasting whole sections of text in from organizations I didn't even know existed. Who knew that there are people called the Georgists who have a whole different angle on land taxation? The amazing thing is that people were being constructive. They were not putting obscenities in there. They weren't deleting it. And the thing is, every person who went online into that document could have just deleted the whole thing. This went on for 3 days. So I was able to really focus on this and embellishing it too, because it was a document, but we started, we started putting in lots of links and, like a cover page, and then a disclaimer, and then an index, and appendices started coming in with all sorts of interesting stuff. It grew to be about 85 or 90 pages. I mean, it was like a book was being crowd-written. And I didn't know who most of these people were, although people were invited to identify themselves and, add their name to a list of signatures and even put a bio in if they wanted to be, more identified. So this went on for 3 days. Through the night, people would have been working on it, and it would have gotten, 10 or 20 pages longer, and there'd be all sorts of other stuff. Like one person said that the government should decide everyone's compensation. And she, because I knew it was a woman because we later talked about this, she created a list of like 20 occupations, like nurses and doctors and lawyers and fire chiefs and everybody else, and said, this is how much they will get as an annual salary once this system is in place. Sort of central planning, central control of wages, all sorts of stuff that, some of it was just plain crazy. But that was really very much in the minority. As a whole, this document contained a lot of really good stuff. Well, it all kept on rolling, and it was very exciting. I had to close it down. I had to close down public access on early Tuesday morning because I got up and found that people were starting to put really obscene stuff in. They were putting obscene language in, and they were saying, you commies, and I guess you would call it sort of right-wing, ideologically motivated insults and graffiti. And so I saw all this stuff happening. Somebody like deleted the whole thing. I restored it. They deleted it again. I restored it. And it became this game of cat and mouse for about 45 minutes. And so this three-day experiment in sort of global, open creation of something had to end. I just went into the settings and switched off unlimited public access so that only people who were registered editors, and at that point I think there were about 70 or 80 people who were registered editors, could continue to work on it, and the general public couldn't. And I switched it off. Tomorrow's the 17th of December, and that will be the 3 months of September, so October, November, December, the 3-month anniversary of the occupation of Wall Street. This is all really fresh and new. And I gave you a story about just my little piece of what I believe is an extremely rich and diverse and extensive horizontal web of lots and lots and lots of people doing things, either face-to-face with their own bodies or with these incredible Web 2.0 tools, continue to manifest itself in lots of different exciting ways that I think will drive real change. To bring you up to date with the American People's New Economic Charter is that we created a group of people called the Charter Collaborative. This very interesting array of people, some of whom were physically at occupations, like in New York and Washington, Philadelphia, Chicago, Oakland. Others who, like myself, were in their kitchens, basically, or at work. This phenomenon of the American People's New Economic Charter has continued, and we had our weekly conference call yesterday. It had to move from a Google Doc into what's called a wiki, and then just look up. It's TAPNEC. That's just the abbreviation for the American People's New Economic Charter. Wikispaces.com. If you go to it and look at it, you'll see that there has been a whole evolution of material and people and links. There are videos, there are lists, there are links to a whole variety of other websites that have to do with the Occupy movement. It was completely electrifying, and you could tell that it was for everybody else involved, whether they were at physical occupations or interacting, face-to-face locally or through the internet. It was just absolutely different. I mean, there are hardcore social, and political activists who have sacrificed their whole lives to be on the ground at protests. So, for them, we were just a bunch of weekend warriors who had jumped in and were all excited about this stuff. I think that what's been happening for the past 3 months is that a very globally minded set of ideas and reference points and practices that a very small number of people, relatively speaking, were fluent in, has gone mainstream. And the Charter just became a container for people's excitement and people's thinking and for ideas and so forth. One container among many was, I thought, I've got to get down to New York City. So on October, I don't know when it was, October 5th or 6th, I drove a Marlborough College van with a number of my colleagues and some other local folks and my 15-year-old daughter down to New York City. And we got down there as early as we could, and we spent the whole day into the evening at Zuccotti Park and around Zuccotti Park, talking to people and taking part in what was going on. But we got to this place where there was this ring of riot police with barricades and riot gear, and I didn't even know that they had these things. But the New York City Police Department has like observation towers on the back of a flatbed truck that you can crank, and they unfold and go up, and they can maintain they can do surveillance of things. So, you know, there was a lot of that hardware around there. It was like sort of a light army battalion that had set up around Zuccotti Park. I talked to people about the new economic charter, connected with a bunch of people. There were a couple of people who had already been part of the new economic charter writing for the past week at that point, or almost a week, who were also they were also occupiers. You know, so they were using smartphones or laptops in internet cafes and so forth when they left the park, because there was no Wi-Fi at the park on that particular day. That came later, but you know, it was an introduction to something that I felt was, and I have since felt more and more strongly, is just as an essential piece of it as what I was doing. I mean, the internet was there, Facebook was there, the social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, live streams, wikis, all sorts of open source blogging software, WordPress. I mean, all that stuff was already there. Yet the essential element that was not there until people actually sat down on September 17th and started occupying Wall Street or Zuccotti Park, and then which spread all over the place. The essential element that was not there until that point was a face-to-face conversational culture among people who all had found common cause. But I want to say that I went down there again a second time and stayed for 2 days. I didn't sleep in the park. I was basically told not to, because my colleagues were concerned that if I were arrested, it would look like Marlborough College was actually protesting as opposed to just, you know, observing and learning. So I had to kind of watch my P's and Q's. But I went back there again on, I guess it was October 26th and 27th. And, you know, at that point, the American People's New Economic Charter was ancient history. I mean, it was 3 weeks old. And it had already picked up a momentum of its own. You know, at that point, it was getting sometimes 500 to 1,000 hits a day, the website. And the flavor of it had changed. On the one hand, the occupation had become even more established. I mean, there was this extensive library, and the media tent was far more organized. It had Wi-Fi. It was much more high-tech. The live streams were better organized. There were more people there. The general assemblies, which are the big meetings where, you know, people say mic check and do hand signals and things like that, were drawing 500 to 1,000 people. There was some history there. They had successfully fought off an attempt at that point by Mayor Bloomberg to shut the whole thing down. The movement has shifted into a new phase, and what I wanted to sort of finish by saying is that, first of all, the impression I have gotten strongly all the way along from the beginning is that, you know, despite the fact that you see a whole bundle of traditional progressive issues being mentioned in the protests and in the declarations and in all the language coming out of the Occupy movement, I think it's important, you know, down deep underneath it all, it's an economic protest. And as I was marching with my daughter and about 10,000 other people up to Fulton Square Park, Foley Square in New York, where this was on October 5th or 6th, where they were met by like another 20,000 union folks, union members and leaders for an enormous demonstration. I looked around and I thought to myself, this is like protests that have occurred at earlier times in American history that had to do with economic pain and suffering and economic justice. But it's not, it's distinct in that way from other protest movements that we've seen since the 1960s. And whether, you know, looking forward now, whether it's manifested, and I think it'll be manifested in a combination of, you know, sit-down, occupy, march, face-to-face ways, and internet-based ways. It's not going to go away. It's, I think, gathering momentum still, and I'll give you a couple of ways to plug in. I think that a lot of it's weather-related at the moment, and I think that next year, unless all of the problems that have been identified are solved, which I think is not going to happen at all, we're going to see more occupations. We're going to see this mature and take on a different form. It's really like a sudden, an abrupt change of our culture in terms of what people are concerned about and what it's legitimate to do. And then I'll just finish up by saying that, of course, with a lot of occupations having been broken up by police, I mean, they've been physically removed from their locations. You can go to interoccupy.org. Don't quote me on the .org or .com, because I think some of them are .com, but there's Interoccupy. There's also something called Occupy Coordination. And then there are many other sites as well, and there are all the live streams I mentioned, and the New York City General Assembly, which is the General Assembly of folks occupying Zuccotti Park, has a very active website with lots of groups with lots of members. So there's a lot of face-to-face action. There are a lot of conference calls being scheduled now. And when you start to dig into it, you realize that there's a huge amount of activity going on. The mainstream media has not understood. I mean, the media, what is it? It's not a person. But what we've seen coming out of the mainstream media, in terms of what you see in USA Today or Fox or CNN, doesn't even come close to explaining or describing what the Occupy movement's all about. You know, it's just all blood and gore. It's all sensationalism. Other media, whether it's sort of traditional radical media like The Nation, or sober-minded media like the Christian Science Monitor, does have some clear and accurate descriptions of what's going on. But I think that for a lot of people who only rely on the mainstream media, they haven't gotten any kind of accurate picture